In the most recent British survey, British Asians made up over 7% of the UK population. There's over 3,700 professional footballers in the UK. Of those professional footballers that are British Asian, we couldn't even fill a match day squad. But head to your local power leagues or goals five-a-side pitches. Go to your school playgrounds. Go to your 11-a-side parks, and you will see British Asians playing in their numbers. So why haven't any of they made it to the top? The lack of British Asian representation in football. Why do you guys think that is as players that have played from grassroots level from such a young age?
Personally, I think it's down to the family, because when you're young, the Asian parents, they don't really push you into it. Growing up, they want you to be like surgeons, lawyers, doctors.
When you're 6, 7 years old, in an Asian family, your parents are not sending you to a football academy. They're sending you to swimming lessons, they're sending you to karate, etc., but they're not sending you to football because it's, oh, if I send him to football, he might break his ankle, he might twist his ankle, he might hurt himself, he's got school the next day, he's got to go family holidays, etc.
I don't think it can be put down to that alone. And I've been researching how ethnicity inflects participation in particular sports for over a decade now. And I also hear similar complaints from white middle class kids. How sport is valued culturally within white middle class families is very similar. You know, sport's a leisure pastime.
They were more likely to push you into the academic, but if they want you to play football, it's more of a side hobby.
We've got young Ryan who's 16 years old, he's a goalkeeper. His dad's here with him every single weekend. Parent participation needs to increase, and it is, but in short amounts.
A lot of my research has revealed that although there may be a significant number of people that will have those views and will might complain about a lack of parental support, that doesn't mean that it's the case for everybody. So I think it's very dangerous for us to say that British Asians, which, I mean, that term in and of itself to me is problematic. British Indian Sikh and a British Pakistani Muslim have very different experiences of sport and have very different home lives. What's often overlooked is you are statistically more likely to be classed as living within poverty if you are British Pakistani or British Bangladeshi than if you are, say, white British. So there's an economic factor to this, which isn't necessarily therefore to do with ethnicity, it's to do with class, it's to do with socio-economic depravity, as opposed to it being simply about ethnicity or culture. When I hear these arguments about sort of culture and family not supporting, first of all, it doesn't reflect what I uncovered in my research, that there is a large number of Asian families that are supportive.
10 years ago, when if you had asked my parents or someone else's parents, would you want your son to be a footballer, they'd probably say, no, I want him to be a doctor and solicitor or lawyer. That's gone now. I work with a number of parents who constantly ask me, from the Asian community, can you recommend me which academy I can send my child to? Okay, I can't travel too far because of work. So they've got their own priorities, but they still want their child to go and participate in an academy.
So it's clear that, you know, the older generation of British Asian players may feel that their parents didn't really help them. Maybe they were a little bit more old-fashioned, didn't see football as a career. But for me, that is a very old-fashioned way of looking at it. And I don't think today's generation and today's kids have those same issues. So what else is it that's holding these kids back?
The very best academies, which I've had the privilege of visiting, have moved towards a philosophy of not just developing football players, they've moved to a philosophy of developing the whole person. Developing the whole person narrative also relies a lot on psychology. So it's about the ability of the player to reframe negative experiences. I've spoken to some British Asian guys in academies who have spoken to me about, you know, racism being fair game. Because all these guys are competing for a contract. And whether it's over nasty racism, which is starting to reappear a little bit, but it's kind of the unconscious bias, the racist banter. For instance, of a young man whose testimony I think is really pertinent here. He was a from all accords, an accomplished athlete, but he was a British Pakistani Muslim guy. He didn't go to strip clubs. He didn't engage in the WhatsApp group with scantily clad women. He didn't drink, and he told me he started to feel ostracised. There was a point where the guys were stretching and they were taking a warm up, and they were all on all fours. When they were on all fours, the captain had said, "Is this the right way? Are we pointing towards Mecca?" And the rest of the team, who were largely white, laughed. And he took a stand and said, "I don't think that's funny." The white guys was kind of saying, "Well, it's just banter," and he'd interpret that as racism. Now, that is just one story of a failure to appropriate or to assimilate with the dominant culture, which led to him being seen as a little bit of a kind of an outsider or a pariah. A lot of what's going on is complex. There are institutional, social, cultural, political barriers. So when I hear this idea of, okay, family is a barrier, I think it lets the national governing bodies and the sport governance organisations get away with them saying, well, and this is something that I wanted to speak to perhaps, because I think this is part of a much broader problem. And the broader problem for me is that the football industry believes that it's meritocratic. So the football industry thinks that, as the old adage goes, the cream will always rise to the top. It's not about offering some sort of social justice agenda. It's about trying to develop players as commodities, because why would, of course, they let some kind of repugnant sort of racism stop them from developing players? Because ultimately they're going to be commodities. They believe that they're above and beyond that. But we don't have to scratch too far below the surface to know that if you're good enough, and to be good enough, what that means is, from an objective point of view, is that you're technically competent, you have athletic prowess. That's what the football industry likes to believe it makes decisions based upon. But it doesn't.
Dave Bassett many years ago said that Asian players aren't physically built enough to be footballers, and I would like to think that's changed, but the likes of Dave Bassett are still scouts.
I hope to think that those attitudes, those ignorant attitudes, are less prevalent. I think that the complaints that I hear is that there's a failure on the part of scouts to consider Asian teams or Asian leads as repositories of talent.
Do you think scouts are looking at Asians as equals to those? Because we hear these stats that there's more British Asian kids in football than there is white kids in amateur football. So then why isn't that reflecting above? Do the scouts need to change as well?
I think so. I think there needs to be an Asian scouting network as well. There's some brilliant, fantastic Asian footballers, but it's what happens beyond the academy. If they don't make it pro, what happens next? They're going to non-league. I don't want to put anyone's name out here, but we've got a player playing in our team here. He was at West Brom until he was 18. He got released at 18, and then went off the face of the planet. He wasn't playing any football. And only last year we got him in at playing at Sunday League again.
There was that myth that comes from the 50s and 60s, in the first migrations of kind of Asians as being weak and frail. If we think about the representation of British Asians in the sports media, there isn't much to counter that particular narrative. From some of my own research into sports media, there is what we might call a symbolic annihilation of British Asian athletes. That is why there needs to be more onus on governing bodies, on the media, on those who govern sport to counter, to be evidence-based and to counter these false narratives, because we come to know about things through our own experiences, through media, and if those institutions with power and authority to shape our understandings are giving us bad stuff, then it's no wonder that these kind of narratives and these kind of stereotypes are taken on, they're kind of internalised, and they become limiting beliefs.
So some British Asian lads that have played football all their lives in England are now turning out to represent the Panjab FA and play on an international level Now obviously the level isn't what it is for the English national team, but what could have been for some of these players had they had the scouting, coaching and development from a young age.
Punjab, they represent a region of India and Pakistan, and we come about around 4 years ago. We've travelled to Russia, Georgia.
They competed in the FIFA World Cup this year, didn't they?
2 years ago we finished in the, as runners-up in front of 15,000 people in the final. So.
Do you think Britain's or England's loss of some Asian players could be the likes of Punjab's gain?
It could be if you look at it in a different perspective, but
Shouldn't be really.
yeah,
Is it a
it
sad
shouldn't-
indictment?
Yeah, it is, because you won't know until you actually, like, more Asians are put out there if they're actually good enough to play for England and stuff like that.
All Asian teams or all Asian leagues, do they have a detrimental effect then? Or are they needed because of the fact that these Asian lads otherwise won't get an opportunity anywhere else?
I think absolutely. I mean, the reason why these teams exist is because of racism historically. What I've always been mindful of, and what the research tells us, is those teams have emerged as safe spaces in which, if you have experienced what might be termed unconscious racial bias, which is a misunderstanding of cultural practices, or whether it is overt racism. If you want to play football and you want to enjoy football, and we all play football because we want to enjoy it, why would you want to put yourself into a position where where it can be quite traumatic in the sense that I'm either risking being racially abused, or I'm risking putting myself in a position where I could potentially go further, but if I don't, I have that kind of internal trauma of, was that because I was Asian, or was I truly not good enough? And that's not a nice place to be in.
If you're an Asian looking to go places, playing with an Asian team, you're not going to go anywhere because you're not going to have the same exposure as to other teams.
I've never seen a scout at an Asian game.
Having bespoke Asian or BME run leagues is a good introduction to football. Once you've gone into there and felt what it's about and seen the environment, then I think it's imperative that you move on from there into a more integrated, more into a mainstream league.
Are they helpful at a participation level? Yes. Are they helpful in a performance level? I'm not so sure, because you can have as many Asian leagues and teams as you like, but if scouts aren't considering them as repositories of talent because of cultural stereotypes, then that won't help British Asian players progress into the upper echelons of the game. So again, it really comes back to me, having appraised the research, that more needs to be done by the powers that be in order to help those pathways appear.
So as you can see, many different layers and many different issues to this debate and this topic of why we don't see more British Asians in the professional football game. And I've been on a journey of discovery as well. I've often believed the stereotypes about British Asians. Their parents aren't supportive enough. Maybe that was the way in the past, but what hasn't changed is the outlook from scouts. We need professional clubs, we need the governing bodies to take action and try and bridge the gap between the British Asian community and professional football, because there clearly is a massive gap there between the two. I really can't answer when I think we'll see a British Asian play for England, or when I think we'll see a fair representation of British Asians in the professional game in England. I hope action happens within the British Asian community, within professional football, by those that can make the decision, make things happen, because I don't want to see more generations of British Asian kids lost and left wondering, could I have made it?